Hello and welcome everybody. Let's talk about books. Today we're going to talk about Dead 11 by Jimmy Giuliano. This was published by Penguin, and as far as I can tell, it's his first published novel. Too long, didn't watch. 4 stars if you like horror. If you like creature horror, this book is for you. Premise, really interesting. Storytelling, multiple perspectives, and also the way the story unfolds and the premise is explained is really interestingly written. I couldn't put this down. I read it in 1.5 days with breaks because I had to work, but a really, really good book. I'm going to read you the blurb and then we're going to go into a deep analysis, which will contain spoilers. On a creepy island where everyone has a strange obsession with the year 1994, a newcomer arrives hoping to learn the truth about her son's death. Clifford Island. When Willow Stone finds these words written on the floor of her deceased son's bedroom, she's perplexed. She's never heard of it before, but soon learns it's a tiny island off Wisconsin's Door County Peninsula, 200 miles from Willow's home. Why would her son write this on this floor? Hoping to find answers, Willow sets out for the island. After a few days on Clifford, Willow realizes this place isn't normal. Everyone seems to be stuck in 1994. They wear outdated clothing, avoid modern technology, and, perhaps most mystifyingly, watch the O.J. Simpson car chase every evening. When she asks questions, people are evasive, but she learns one thing. Close your curtains at night. High schooler Lily Becker has lived on Clifford Island her entire life, and she's sick of the island's twisted mythology and adhering to the rules. She's been to the mainland, and everyone is normal there. So why is Clifford so weird? Lily vows to prove that the islanders' beliefs are a sham. But are they? Then Willow disappears. Her brother, Harper, comes to Clifford to look for her, and when he learns the truth, that this island is far more sinister than anyone would have imagined, he is determined to blow the whole thing open, if he can get out alive, ... So, we have a couple of tropes here. Number 1, we have Willow, who is the bereaved and now estranged from her husband, mother of an 8-year-old son, who died in a car accident. So basically he was riding his scooter in the neighborhood and a car came, and they basically think that, or Willow thinks that if she'd put on the helmet correctly, he might have survived. We don't know, but anyway, he's dead. Now, what she has done is something that I think is quite common. She has preserved her son's room the way it was on the day that he died, and she keeps cleaning it, and she keeps making sure she's dusting it, but she also keeps it in a way that suggests someone still lives there. So it's the bedspread isn't put down too neatly. The posters are still hung up a little bit crookedly. So she hasn't really made it into a complete shrine. She's just stopped moving time in it. So it's a little bit like a time capsule. And one day, she finds these words written down, and she decides to research Clifford Island and finds out that there is nothing to find about it. She finds it on a map, but there is no information. But then, lo and behold, in her inbox pops up, because she's a teacher and she stopped teaching shortly after her son died because she was going through a serious bout of depression and simply couldn't function anymore, which is totally understandable. And she gets the invitation or the information that there is a job opening as a, well, I don't know, as a youth counselor, something or other on the island. And she is like, well, you know, my husband and I have stopped talking. My husband, I think at some point also the husband moves to Florida. They're not divorced, but they're not talking. And so she decides, okay, what could possibly go wrong? My son wrote Clifford Island on the floor of his bedroom. Under, I think, his toy chest, so it wasn't kind of visible. And when she showed it to her husband says, well, you wrote this yourself. So she takes this as an omen, and she applies and she gets the job. Really kind of like, so she travels there, and it is quite foresty. There's also hunting going on, and I get from the descriptions that the island is actually quite big. It's not a small island, but there aren't that many people, and most people are actually grown-ups or already, like old age pensioners. So you don't really have a pyramid, but you have an inverted pyramid when it comes to population. And she soon realizes, so she basically starts investigating. She says, well, has anybody seen my son? Blah, blah, blah. She's trying to find him. Well, not has anybody seen my son, but why would my son have anything to do with this? And she meets Lily, and basically we learn about what happens to her because she writes letters to her husband, and we also have basically her focus and her perspective through her letters, and the way the book is structured is that it, for example, says Willow as the chapter heading, and then 24 days until her disappearance, and then basically we have her story written out. Sometimes it's a third person perspective, sometimes she writes a letter. Sometimes you also get text message threads in the book. But the problem is she also vanishes. And her brother Harper, who's a sports journalist, goes and investigates. He also meets Lily because the way he knows that his sister went there was because there was a picture taken at a high school basketball game, and it shows Willow, his sister, and this girl, Lily, and it says where Lily comes from. And when he tries to investigate further, the internet picture is taken down, but he tracks down the photographer, and he basically gets all of the information from him and says, well, it was taken there and there, and blah, blah, blah. So he goes there trying to find Lily. And he arrives and he sees really weird stuff. So people basically dressed like 1994, driving cars like 1994. People have VCRs. There are no DVD players. There is no flat screen TV. Nothing. And this idea of watching the O.J. Simpson car chase is everywhere. It's present everywhere. People are watching it in the local pub. As he passes by somebody's house, he sees that they have it on as well on the TV. So it's like they are stuck in this one day. And he meets Lily, and Lily basically tells him, yes, I have seen your sister, and yes, she has vanished, and we don't know, I don't know what's happened to her. And she basically confides in him and says that everybody here is cray-cray because they say that there are dead things that come out, and that there is a curse, and that we are soldiers that keep the curse away from sweeping through the island, killing everybody on it, and then making its way to the mainland. And so as the story progresses, what we find out is that there were two islands, Wallen and Schilling, in the same lake, where for about 100 years people lived, and then there was like a first culling, as they call it, where some people were killed, then a second culling a couple decades later where more people were killed, and then the final culling when everybody else was killed. And the same, and of course this was in the 18th century, so there is very little to no information, but it seems like the islanders believe it tracked from Wallen to Schilling, then the same thing happened there 100 years later, and then it happened in the 1920s on Clifford, and then once again in 1994 when the Dead 11 happened. And the Dead 11 are 11 children plus the pastor who spent kind of like a night out in the community center or youth center on the island. The house is still there. And the next day everybody was dead and gone. And basically, well, more importantly, they were gone. And basically they tried to hush it up and said that there was carbon monoxide poisoning. They rigged it so that the police wouldn't investigate, and that false information was sent to the coroner. And apparently they didn't really bury the dead because there weren't any bodies, they just put empty coffins in the ground. And it turns out that the dead come back. And now, most recently, they have become physical. Usually they just try to entice you to follow them and then you vanish and you're never seen again. But now they actually can approach you and touch you, and you see every so often a person who's got a bruise. And of course it's your loved ones. But now everybody who has seen them before says that they are changing. They used to look quite normal, but now they look like they're falling apart. And it is believed by the islanders that this means that there's something shifting and maybe the evil cannot be contained any longer. And what we learn is that Willow finds out what's going on. Willow also was targeted deliberately to be brought to the island because the islanders consider themselves soldiers against the darkness, which they probably are, at least in their minds. And over the course of the book you get hints that this may actually be true. But they're dying out because they don't have any children anymore, and every so often a child will leave. For example, Lily Becker is on the verge of leaving. So they try to bring like-minded people onto the island to replenish the numbers. And with her take on her son's death and her will to preserve everything the way it was on the day he died, she kind of fits very well into this whole setup on the island, that there is a death and a bereavement of a child, which of course is the most terrible thing anyone can imagine, and the need to hold on to it, the need to keep, and I think this is what this circles around, the need to keep the wound open. Because by reminding themselves constantly of the day when it happened, neither Willow nor the islanders can try and deal with their grief. They keep it alive because the islanders believe that the grief will keep the creature, and they totally believe that there's some kind of demonic creature that is older than time itself, living on the island somewhere in the depths, comes out every so often, and when it realizes that the grief has gone, it realizes, oh, I'm hungry, and starts feeding. But if the grief is still there, and if everything is the way it was, it's like, oh, I only harvested yesterday, so I couldn't be hungry. You might say, okay, so where's the logic in that? Wouldn't it just get hungry normally? I don't know, but one could say maybe it feeds off grief. And as long as the grief is also fresh, you know, it gets what it needs. This would be one way of kind of like trying to rationalize this, if you're trying to rationalize it. And so they basically send people out to find like-minded people that they could entice to come to the island. And they do this, in Willow's case, by actually breaking into her house, writing down Clifford Island on the floor, and also every so often haunting the house by pretending that her son is still there. And then basically she got targeted with the email of the job posting as well. She finds that out over the course of her investigation. However, she also encounters her son, because her son is actually a dead thing and comes to her and she follows him. And basically the islanders realize that she cannot be trusted because she's trying to break the story open and apart and make sure that everybody finds out about it. So they trap her in the house with the creature. And the creature is real. The creature comes to her and she dies. So this is what I was a bit unsure about, because I really have a problem with stories that are built up kind of like, oh yeah, this is a horror story, it's creature horror or whatever, and then it's like, surprise, it's not. You know, because you sometimes have this when you end up in a situation like this, that this is some kind of cult, that they are just basically cray-cray and they believe that there is something going on and they just start sacrificing people. This is not the case. The creature is real. The creature is also described in my opinion, very good way, because it is described in such a way that you can imagine parts of it, but you can't imagine its totality, and that's what's creepy. And in the end, Harper finds out all about it. He meets Willow. He's almost killed, but he escapes with the help of Lily and Lily's boyfriend from the mainland. He escapes, and later on Lily escapes. But Harper believes now. He believes that there is something sinister going on, and that the islanders are really keeping something dark in check, which, if they didn't do their job, would kill the islanders and then move on to the peninsula. And from there, God knows where it would go. So he is basically converted, and he decides not to disclose the story. And he basically puts the story together, sends a copy to Lily and says, well, does this cover your experience or your set of circumstances? Pretty much, but he doesn't ever publish it. Now, that is The Dead 11, and it is a really, really good book. I really enjoyed it. I would give it 4 stars. I would say it is very innovative in the way the story unfolds. So I really liked the different perspectives that you have, like Willow writing a letter to her husband, the text exchanges between Lily and her boyfriend, but also the third person perspective. And so it all comes together, and it's also, the clues are there. I mean, it starts off with a really weird scene between 2 ladies, but when you then think back on it, it makes sense. And it even starts out as a fully immersive story. A note to the reader. On December 14th, my sister went missing. Her name was Willow. I suppose I could have written, her name is Willow, because she's technically missing and not legally dead. But as much as it hurts to write about my sister in the past tense, it'd be disingenuous not to. She's dead. She's as dead as it gets. And then basically Harper tells the story. But this is the note to the reader. The first chapter is called The Old Woman and the Corpse. Esther and Gloria had a routine. Every day at 1:12 p.m., the elderly neighbours would shuffle to their mailboxes. Esther on one side of the gravel road and Gloria on the other, and they'd wave to each other. The widows owned the only 2 houses on a rural 1-mile stretch of road on Clifford Island. Their properties had been cut into the forest a half-century ago, their homes engulfed by pine trees with hidden driveways peeking through thin gaps in the sweet and earthy-smelling woods. They were a superstitious pair, after all. The stench of rotting flesh lingered for days, something to remind the women that death could sneak up at any moment. The women's routine went like this. Esther would walk down her driveway wearing blue slippers, grey cotton pants, and a red cardigan. She reached her mailbox and raised a right hand to Gloria, who would be wearing a faded white nightgown. Gloria waved back. The women checked for mail and then dotted back up their driveways. It went like that every day, rain or shine, sleet or snow, for 25 years. In many days there was no mail delivered. Christmas, the 4th of July, Sundays of course, but sometimes there was just no mail. No letters, no bills, no J.C. Penney catalogue. The women checked their mailboxes anyway, always at 1:12 p.m. And then it goes on to describe how one of the women doesn't show up. So the other one breaks into her house, finds her dead. Of natural causes, they are elderly ladies anyway. And she basically then proceeds to drag the corpse to the mailbox, ties her to it, removes her nightgown because she thinks it's really important, and basically ties her to the mailbox, and then basically goes to her own mailbox and waves, and she's way too late. She realizes this, and that's when you this is the beginning of the book. You kind of go, everybody here's a crazy person. Hello to everybody who's just tuned in. And the way this is described is so grotesque on the one hand, but then Jimmy Giuliano doesn't make fun of his protagonists. You don't for a second think that this woman that this is laughable. It's the sheer necessity that comes out through the words that describe the need for this lady to drag the body out there, to keep to that routine. And it could have many reasons. It could be that this is an early, or that this is one form of dementia, that without this routine, she is so lost, so she makes the routine happen. It could have many reasons. Only as the story progresses do you realize what the real reason is. But the scene is grotesque, but it's described in such a respectful manner that you feel for the protagonist. Not once do you think that this is funny. It's not funny at all. You really feel for the character and kind of like, yeah, well, she really needs to make this happen. And he describes how difficult it is to drag the body down the tracks, down the steps, and down the driveway to the letterbox, because it's a long way back from the house, you know, and she's an elderly lady, and although the other one isn't especially heavy, it is a chore. And the way he breaks the story wide open there and then is really well done. And I would also say that sometimes people do really strange things, but you always feel for the characters. And even when they do despicable things like killing Willow, they are all multidimensional. They're not just evil, they're not just crazy, but they are human beings that are trying to make the best out of a terrible situation. And that's what I think sets Jimmy Giuliano's book apart from maybe other horror stories of the same ilk, because it's character driven and it's all about how the characters develop. The character development in this is really strong. So for me, this is an insta-buy if this sounds in any way interesting to you. But I will say it does deal with grief, and it does deal with children dying, and it does deal with terrible things happening to people being mutilated and stuff. So it isn't an easy read, but it isn't overly gory either. And the ending is interesting. So if this sounds interesting to you, I can really recommend it. I don't know if it's available in paperback, but I really, really like the hardback version. I mean, I really like hardbacks. The only problem is, you know, you don't have enough space to keep them. But even if we take off the dust jacket, it looks really nice. So it's a very sober book from the makeup, but I really like the way it looks. So thank you all for listening, and have a lovely Easter.